Okay, my friends, ready to go? Daniel's ready? Mark's ready? Yo-ya? Andre? Sophie? Okay, let's do this. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday. It's a nice, beautiful, sunny day out there again, which is nice. Isn't that nice? Isn't this a beautiful city? Is this not a bit? Yeah? It's okay? Hello. So, here we go. So Ben is here. Good morning, Ben. Unadi is here. Good morning, Unadi. And Elizabeth is here. Good morning, Elizabeth. Okay. Yes. Let's dive in where we were yesterday. Talking about World War I. I think, I don't want to spend a ton of time on World War I because I think we all have we've encountered it before in other courses, and we don't want to go over the same things over and over again, but there is some things I do want to pull out of it. Okay, so we said that the war was kind of set off by the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but that was kind of it was the spark, but there was a lot of other things happening in the background, right? People arming themselves, people trying to suppress nationalism in the Balkans, this sort of alliance system in which all of these great powers allied with each other, hoping that nobody would be foolish enough to attack them because of that. But of course, maybe one thing that history teaches us is that humans are sometimes foolish. And so very quickly, following the assassination of the Archduke, we have everybody involved in a continent-wide conflict. So this is kind of what the map looked like, and we said that in the early stages of the war, or kind of immediately prior to the war, Germany had a plan about what they were going to do at the beginning of the war, and they called it the Schlieffen Plan. I think it was named after a man named Schlieffen who came up with it, I think, but don't quote me on that, I'm not sure. I might be making it up. what was this Schlieffen plan about? What was the plan? Right. So knock France out really quick and then deal with Russia a little bit later, right? And again, if you're ever fighting a war, God willing, you never will, but if you're ever fighting a war, you don't want to fight on two fronts, right? Because you have to split up your army to deal with both sides, and then you're fighting at half strength in either place. You don't really want that. And so the Germans try to knock the French out and then head off to Russia. Does that work? Does that plan work?
No.
Does not work. Why not?
Because Russia come early. Germans thought Russia will didn't get oil first that early, and then eventually Germany got sandwiched by both countries.
Yeah. So, sorry, online people. I'm just going to stand up for a second. But what happens is that the Germans try to sort of go into France through Belgium, and they're trying to drive for Paris. So they're going to rush into Paris, conquer Paris, and then they'll have kind of all of France under their control. But it doesn't work because the French kind of come to oppose them, and the British do as well. The British kind of come to the rescue. And so what they're trying to do, and I'll sit back down now, what they're trying to do is the Germans are trying to get around behind the French to get in at Paris, and the French are trying to keep them from doing that. And so they have this, what they call a race to the sea. And so each army is trying to sort of get around the other until they finally get to the ocean, and neither side has been able to get behind the other one. And then they're kind of stuck. And so that's where they start digging those trenches that we saw in the video yesterday, because of course if you stick your head up, you just get cut down by machine gun fire. Everybody digs in a trench, and then that's kind of where things stay for the rest of the war, right? And so again, the Germans will gain some ground, and then they'll lose it to the French, and then the French will gain some ground, and nothing really happens except huge numbers of young men kind of die tragically in the mud in this part of the war. Nothing really gets kind of taken or resolved out on the Western Front. The Eastern Front is different, of course. The Russians get there sooner than the Germans think that they will, and then but even so, the Germans have some success against the Russians. Right? We said yesterday that at the beginning of the war, everyone's excited, right? Everyone has these sort of romantic pictures of what warfare is like. It's based on this kind of warfare with, of sort of marching and shooting with muskets. And in fact, in the early days of World War I, you see all kinds of crazy things happening, things that you wouldn't see in warfare today, like people riding horses, right? So people are riding horses into war at the beginning of World War I. People have swords, believe it or not. Some army members have brought their sword with them. Not much use against a machine gun, but again, you can see the kind of warfare they were thinking of in their head, right? So the Scottish army was wearing kilts, believe it or not. You know, those kind of skirts they wear? They were wearing kilts at the beginning of this conflict. Ridiculous, right? It's not that kind of war, but nobody realizes what it's going to be like. And so they all sign up, excited, looking for honor and glory, thinking that when they come back, they'll be heroes and the girls will be all over them, and it'll be just great, right? It'll be a grand adventure. But as we saw in some of the videos yesterday, that's not what they encountered, right? The technology is so different and so advanced from the earlier conflicts that it's a war like no one has ever seen, right? Humans have been able to manufacture technology that is able to kill other humans at a very rapid rate, right? So lots of long-range shells like you saw, machine guns, gas, all kinds of things are made to kill people efficiently, and they do. Thousands and thousands and thousands of young men die very, very quickly. and tragically, right, for no reason, arguably. Yeah, so this is a war of technology. It's an industrial war, and so we saw some of these technologies yesterday. People digging trenches, machine guns, which are not brand new, but it's kind of their first role in a major conflict, I guess. They exist for some years before that, but they're more common in World War One. We have airplanes that are brand new, right? Airplanes are like 4 years old, and again, here are these very early planes. At first, just for kind of spying on the enemy, flying over top, but eventually they start sticking machine guns on them, and you've got people flying through the air, shooting at each other, right? With no parachutes, and in these, paper mache planes. Insanity. What else do we see? Yeah, so we see machine guns, we see gas masks. Later we see the development of a tank, which looks incredibly primitive, but again, it's the only way to cross that no man's land. It's the only way to cross that place between the trenches. Yeah, we've got these massive guns that can shoot shells, 4 kilometers, right? Insane technology. Stuff that no one's ever seen before. Oh yeah, so what I would like to do at this point is talk a little bit about the British home front. And so this is going to happen not just in Britain. Good morning. This is not just going to happen in Britain. All countries are going to have what they call a home front. Okay, so in a war, the front is where you're fighting, right? The front is like right where the armies are in contact. But here, we're talking about the people who are fighting the war at home, because World War I is a new type of war because of its technology, right? But it's also a new type of war because it's what they call total war, okay? And that means that basically the entire society is participating in the war effort, okay? It's not just the army. So let's see. So the United States Army was in Afghanistan for a long time, right? They're being removed at this point, but they were off in Afghanistan fighting a war, and people at home kind of didn't pay attention, right? Life went on for them as normal. They went to work, they watched movies, they did whatever they wanted to do. They saw, updates on the news at night, but that was kind of it, right? So the war was going on over here, and the US, kind of paid attention when they felt like it. But in World War I, everyone is paying attention because everything in society is being organized in order to win the war, right? So I was going to say a bit more, but maybe I'll leave it for the reading. So in all countries that are fighting in the war, it's critically important that their military is organized and fighting, but it's also critically important that things are organized at home, because fighting a war requires all kinds of supplies, right? All of these soldiers have to eat, they have to drink, they need places to go to the bathroom, they need boots and uniforms and guns and bullets and helmets and all kinds of things, right? And we need to build planes and trucks and bombs and guns, and all kinds of things need to be produced. But also, you need the economy to keep going at home, right? People need food at home, and they need to be able to go to work and all kinds of things. And so what's happening in the field, what's happening at the war on the front, is just as important as what's happening at home, because if the home front doesn't deliver, then your army has no food, they have no bullets, they have no supplies, and then it's all over, right? So the home front the economy has to keep going, production has to keep going in order to support the society and support the soldiers who are in the field. And so again, I would argue that what's happening at home is equally as important as what's happening at the war, at least for a conflict like this one. So what I would like you to do is take a few minutes, it's just 2 pages, and talk and read about the British home front. So this is what's happening at home in Britain while soldiers are off fighting the war, okay? I've got a few questions for you that have to do with how society changed and also how gender roles changed as well, because again, women are going to play a pretty important part in the success of this war effort, okay? So again, the pages are in Microsoft Teams, just where they were yesterday. I'll give you some time to read this section, answer those questions, number 1 to 3, and then we'll discuss number 5 as a group, okay? Coolio? All right. So I'm going to put some time on the clock here. I'll let you read and answer, and then we will discuss. 30 more seconds. Nope. Okay, so very brief little blurb about changes on the home front in Britain, but again, they were significant changes. So the first question I have for you is what in fact brought this centralization of power to the government? What gave them all of that power, or why did they take all that power? Yeah, exactly. So prior to this, in Britain and in Canada and other places, the federal government, the government of the country was really quite small, and they didn't really do that much. And so, they did foreign policy and they set tariffs and things like that. But other than that, they didn't really have much of a job, and the federal government was actually quite small. But here, like Miles mentioned, because of that, need for resources to fight the war, the government is kind of forced to say, okay, we need to step in and make sure everything in society is devoted to the war effort. That factories are producing, that they're producing the right stuff, that we're getting enough food to the front. And so, yeah, the government steps in and takes control, right? Here in Canada, they took control by something called the War Measures Act, which doesn't exist anymore. But at the time it did, and it gives the government power to do all kinds of things, right? So Miles, for instance, if Miles was in Canada, and let's say he had a factory, he owned a factory that made washing machines, the government might go to Miles and say, you know what, we don't really need washing machines anymore, we need guns. So your factory's going to make guns now. Here's how. And so the government actually had the power to do that, to kind of make companies do what they needed them to do, right? And so, yeah, the government actually assumes a lot of power in order to fight this war. And so, Michelle, can you help me out with this one? Explain the government's administration of its human resources in the face of total war. How does it deal with its people? Say that one more time. I think I got it, but yeah. Sure. So yeah. So they're able to. They send people to factories and get those factories to produce things that the war needs. That's good. Jim, what else do they do? What else does the government do to kind of control human resources, to sort of get its people working for the war effort? Say that one more time, but just a little bit louder. Okay, such as? Yeah, well, there are some controls put on food a little bit later on, right? Because lots of that food has to go to soldiers fighting the war, right? So they will ration some things a little bit later on. Daniel, can you help me out with? Is there a little more to this answer, or let's see, social roles, rationing. I think there might be a little bit more. Yeah, what other controls do they put on the workforce in Britain? The government.
They have weekends which have nine votes. There's all nine and then regular.
Right. So that'll be a huge change, right? All of these women who are kind of drawn into factory work, right? Prior to this, of course, they wouldn't have been, because women are, too soft and too frail and too emotional to work in these big manly jobs, right? Until, and I'm saying that sarcastically, but then of course, once the men had gone to war, somebody needs to work these jobs, right? And women come in and start working them. Canon, what else does the government do in terms of the workforce? There's something to do with pubs, something to do with the clock. Yeah, what's the thing about the pubs? Or the clock, whichever. Okay, so while Cannon's looking, Yo-Ya, can you tell me one other thing that the government did? Maybe not. Cannon, do you have it? What do you got? Okay, tell me. Yeah, so in order to give people a little more free time in the evening, the government actually set the clocks an hour ahead. Right? They moved time itself, if you will. Yeah, they did that. What else did they do? Yo-Ya, are you ready, or not so much? Oh, not so much? Okay, Andre, what do you got? Huh? That one? What was the thing about the pubs, Sophie? Before the ragtime thing. Not so much not allowed to drink in public, but they're saying that there's only certain hours in which you can drink, right? So the government felt that not enough stuff for the war was being produced, yet people seem to have a lot of time to drink in the pubs, and so they limited the hours that the pubs could open, so to keep people from drinking too much. Yeah, so the government stepped in and did all kinds of things, right? Controlling the food supply, controlling what factories are actually produced, encouraging women to get into the workforce, limiting people's drinking hours, which of course the Brits like to do in their pubs. They like to hang out and drink pints and things like that. But they do all kinds of things. But there's also lots of social changes going on as well. So what about number 3 here? The new social roles in Britain that emerged from the war. So how does society kind of change as a result?
Women to increase the woman workers
Yeah.
and make the numbers of women and the assistant.
Yeah, yeah, that's and that's huge, right? Because before this, women's place was in the home, right? Women, cleaned the house and cooked the meals and looked after the children, and they didn't work really outside of the home unless you were, unless you really had no money and you were just forced to work. But most women did not. And here, there's all kinds of women entering the workforce, right? Doing the jobs that men used to do and getting paid reasonably well, right? Although they still made less than men did because, of course, they were women and they were discriminated against. But still, they were out there making their own money, right? They had power now, right? They were empowered. They had their own job. They had their own money. They didn't have to rely on their husbands so much or their fathers. What else is kind of happening in terms of the social structure of Britain here? Or society in general? Sophie, what did you want to say about that ragtime thing? Yeah. And- yeah. So in your own words, what's going on there? No. Well, what's happening is that people are going out and dancing and drinking. That's what's happening. This is one of the things that you see happening at home during a war, is that a lot of the kind of normal rules of society get kind of put on hold, right? And people start acting a little differently, right? They start acting a little more, sometimes impulsively. You've heard of YOLO, right? Everyone knows what YOLO means? Yeah. Is that a Drake thing? Is that where that came from? Did Drake come up with YOLO, or who did? I don't know. You think it was what? It was just there? Okay. And on the seventh day, God created YOLO, and it was good. No. So, I'm joking here, but often you'll see that that's what happens during a war, is that there's kind of this feeling of YOLO, right? People are off on the front dying. You don't know if you'll get to go next. Life is short, and everyone is kind of, has this feeling of, well, you only live once, so let's have fun with it. So sometimes you see that during or after a war. People start to act a lot more impulsive, a lot more hedonistic, a lot more kind of YOLO-y. And so, yeah, lots of these young people are going out dancing and drinking and having a good time. British society is pretty conservative, but it kind of loosens up a little bit during the war because, again, YOLO, right? So, yeah, people are out dancing and drinking, and there's bands playing and things like that, all kinds of craziness. What other social changes are happening?
Their salaries are raising, and then you get more money to spend on not only buying the basic needs, and then maybe they'll buy something like entertainment or maybe getting to the club and drink.
Yeah. What's really interesting here is that even though some foods are rationed, so the things that you would need to send to the war, like meat or sugar or butter or coffee or things like that, things that you would have to send to the soldiers are limited. So you might only get a certain amount of meat every week, right? So it's rationed. But at the same time, these people are making more money, right? And so what are they going to spend it on? Well, they're going to go out and dance and drink, or they're going to buy themselves maybe nice fur coats, or they might get themselves a piano for their front room, right? So people are, not able to get all of the necessities of life like they once were, but they're making more money. And so they get to buy they get to buy luxury items, right? They get to buy gramophones. You know what a gramophone is? Anybody? It's like a what? No, not quite. But you're okay. But you're kind of in the ballpark, maybe. It's a piece of electronic technology. What's a gramophone? Did anyone Google it and see a picture of it? Google it and have a look at one of these things. Any idea what that thing is or what it does? Yeah. Yeah, it's a very early record player. So you had a vinyl, they were into vinyl back then. Yeah, you had a vinyl disc like a record and a needle, and then the sound came out of that kind of horn thing coming out of the top of it. It's a record player, right? Super expensive at the time, but suddenly people were able to afford it and play music in their house. Fun, right? Can't have a house party without music. So people are able to do this, and so kind of what starts to happen is that there's less of a difference in society in terms of finances, right? So, the people at the top, the rich, fancy people, they're kind of under the same controls as everyone else, right? So they have their food kind of rationed as well. But the people that are lower, they're making more money than they used to, and they can buy fancier stuff. And so the sort of, economic divisions in society kind of get a little bit more loose, right? Some people who used to have less money now have more. They're able to buy luxuries. The people at the top of society with lots of money, well, they can't really buy some of the things they used to buy. And so, yeah, it kind of like changes the social structure of society. And of course, you have women, going off to work, right? Which might work out for you. What if you're a man who has, 4 unmarried daughters at home? Now they're all going out to work, they're coming home, they're bringing in money that can contribute to the house. Yeah, this is great, right? So people's kind of place in society shifts around, right? While all of these things are happening, while women are entering the workforce, while people's kind of social, moral, considerations are changing because they're going out and, drinking and dancing and doing who knows what else after. I mean, it's a crazy time, right? War is a crazy time. I think we've talked about number 4. I think, the purpose of rationing was to, ensure that you had enough food to send to the front to give to soldiers. What do you think about this question here? That war is a positive force for effecting egalitarian social change. Do you know what egalitarian means? Anybody? What's it mean? What's it mean? Yeah, it's kind of well, that's what the question is talking about. That's not quite what egalitarian means, but the question is kind of referring to that. What does egalitarian mean?
Everyone has the same or similar things,
Yeah. Yeah, kind of, right? There's a few kind of different, depending on the context you use it, but here it means it creates more equality in society, right? It creates more equality. And so, what do you think? Is war good for equality in society, or not? No, why not? Why don't you think so?
I think the society contains products, capital, land, assets. So if there is a war, like these products cannot be provided equally. So I think that the war is not positive equality.
Okay. So the war effort requires all sorts of resources, and so those may be kind of taken away and shipped out, and so maybe it's bad for equality or bad for egalitarianism. That could be true. What else? What else do you think?
think it's good at egalitarian, just like in wartime, everyone will distribute like the same amount of food and then for the basic needs. And the wealthy people and the poor people have the same amount of food, and then they're the same. The government treats them as the same object. And then the other thing is like the poor people will get a job, and then they'll like the gap between the wealthy people and the poor people come closer, and then eventually maybe at some point they will the it will be more like egalitarian, like pronounced, and then like yeah, because like the wealthy people and the poor people have like they both got money, and then they can also buy something like entertainment like piano or gramophone.
Yeah, and that.
So yeah, maybe they come closer to the same level.
Yeah, and that's certainly what this piece of the text is arguing, right? And that it actually did improve the quality of life of some people who had less money, right? And some people who had a lot of money, they still continued to have a lot of money, but they were kind of brought down a little bit because they were under a lot of the same restrictions as everyone else. So yeah, there was some equality created there. What else do you think?
I also think like women is very important, and then because women didn't used to like can have like jobs and then working, but now they like although after war like women also like will lose their job because of all the men will come back to the country, but like it has like great breaking point of like women can work, and then women can prove they're also ability, like have the ability to work as a man.
Yeah, and it does prove that, right? It like, of course, that's what's interesting is that women are kind of kept in the home for a long time until they're needed in factories, and then, as we'll see in a bit, when the war is over, men kind of expect that, oh well, women will just go back to the house and start cooking and cleaning again. But as it turns out, women don't want to do that, right? Women have autonomy. They're empowered. They have their own jobs, their own money, and they don't want to just go back to the home, or lots of them don't anyway. So yeah, it kind of changes society that way as well. It creates maybe a little more equality between men and women. One thing that this article did not mention is that a lot of the young people, the young men who signed up to go to war, many of them signed up because the army would pay them. So they didn't have a job, or they were looking for a job and couldn't find one. And then along comes this war where they'll pay you every day. And so a lot of young men join in that for that reason. But who do you think is most likely to sign up for the war then? The richer part of society or the poorer part? Yeah, so in terms of kind of dying in the war, that sort of disproportionately affected poorer families, right? Because they were the ones who, their sons would volunteer to go to war because it was a paying job, right? But of course, as we know, huge numbers of these young men are not going to they're not going to come home again, right? And so the poor part of society is going to be affected more than the richer part, right? In terms of just losing people, right? Losing family members. What do you think? Any other thoughts on this? More equality during wartime or less?
I don't know if it's really is like people in different skin color. Like if in some countries, people in black are being bad treated, and if they join the war with people in white, maybe they can get the same treatment.
Right. And that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting reality as well. People who are join the war effort but who are visible minorities, right? And I think every country, I don't know, about Britain and France and countries like that so much, but I know that here in Canada and in the U.S. there were Black Americans and Black Canadians fighting in the war, right? There were Asian Canadians and Asian Americans fighting in the war. There were Indigenous Canadians fighting in the war. Not huge numbers, but they were there, right? They were present, and yeah, it's a good thought, but I don't know. That it changed a lot for them. Um, in terms of their status in society, I don't think it changed a lot, but it is worth saying that people signed up, right? And even and it's probably worth saying too that they signed up to fight for a country that discriminated against them, which is, worth respecting, I think. Even though I'm not treated well by my country, I will fight for it anyway, right? That's worth respecting, I would think. But yeah, it's definitely worth saying that visible minorities participated in the war effort, and there was lots of white Canadians in the war, but there were non-white Canadians participating as well and fighting and dying. Right? Okay, let's see. Okay, let's take a break, come back, and then we'll talk about something maybe similar but maybe different. But we'll see. Okay? Take 10, come back, and we'll do something slightly different. Okay, and we're back. So, clearly the war has had massive changes for society in Britain. And I think we can extend these changes all the way through. So, Germany would have experienced changes, some similar and some different. France, certainly the US and Canada did as well. Actually, this is an aside, but World War One is actually super important for Canada because prior to World War One, Canada was really a colony of Britain, and so when World War One was declared, Britain declared war on Germany, but Canada didn't really have a say in that because we were a colony. It was like, okay, well, Britain's gone to war, so I guess we're going to war too. That's all it was. But after World War One, because Canada was such an important player, it was we were at Vimy Ridge, like you saw in the video, and we were at lots of the other major battles, and the Canadians really proved themselves. And so, coming out of World War One, the rest of the world, but also Canada, kind of saw itself as something separate from Britain. Like we weren't just a colony anymore; we were kind of our own thing. And so, people start to kind of develop a Canadian identity and pride in Canada. A lot of the British people who lived here in Canada prior to the war thought, well, I'm British, I'm just living here in Canada. But after the war, people started to think of themselves as Canadians, right? Whatever that meant. So the war was really important for that reason for Canada, but very important for women as well as they, get to get out of the house, they gain autonomy, they have money of their own, they can make their own decisions and do what they, well, they can't entirely do what they want, but they can do more than they used to be able to do. And so it's a big change for them. So what I wanted to do next, sorry, those are kind of out of context. This is what we just talked about here in the article. So I've just got some changes or some slides that describe that. But I wanted to just show you a short video that talks about how gender roles changed and how they did not change during World War One, right? So it's kind of on the same topic as the thing that we read, just in video form. Okay, so for those of you who are online, I'm just putting this information into Microsoft Teams. So you'll have the link to the video, and then you'll have these 3 questions. So number 1, how were traditional gender roles maintained during the war? What do I mean by gender roles, would you say?
Like the woman and the man, like the jobs and the stuff they do.
Yeah, so like what women's jobs are, what men's jobs are, what women are supposed to do, what men are supposed to do, how men are supposed to be and how women are supposed to be, right? We all I think we know kind of what traditional gender roles are supposed to be like. And so one of the things the video will talk about is how those things stayed the same during the war. But the video will also talk about how those gender roles evolved and changed as a result of the war. And then finally, I'll ask you this: what are the positive and the negative outcomes of this change? Okay, so some things stayed the same, some things changed, but what's good about that and what's bad about that? Cool? Coolio? Okay. So online people, the link is in Microsoft Teams. You can go and watch the video. We'll watch the video here in class, and then we'll come back and talk about these questions, okay? So we'll see you in just a few minutes. Okay. Right. And okay, so there's tons of information in there, but I think very interesting nonetheless. So, what do you want to do? You want to start with how traditional gender roles changed, or how they stayed the same? What do you want to start with? Same. Okay, how did they stay the same?
I change.
Oh, you want to change? Okay, let's start with change. How did they change?
Like, women have the right to vote.
Right. So not right away, but this is sort of a period in which women's, enough pressure builds and women are given the right to vote, right? In different times, different places, but that's big, right? For the first time. What else?
Yeah, with nursing and basically replacing the work.
Yeah, so we see women kind of entering into the domain of men, right? They're entering the army, they're entering the navy. Some of them manage to actually, get into uniform and start shooting at the bad guys, right? Which is pretty amazing. There's lots of nurses, on the front lines working there. Women working in factory jobs. All of those things, women are kind of entering into the world of men, right? For maybe the first time. What else is changing?
As you mentioned as last, women the hairstyle and their wearing.
Right. So women's fashion, how women present themselves to society changes. I wish you would have had a few more pictures, but I think you saw how some of the women were dressed very plainly. Of course, they were at work, but prior to the war, women would have dressed very conservatively, very plain, not very sexual in any way. But toward the end of the war and after the war, women really start to express their femininity and their sexuality, right? So hair gets cut short. Shocking, right? Skirts are shorter than, above the ankle. Scandalous, right? But still, women's fashion changes, the way women cut their hair, they wear makeup, right? And that goes along with their ability to sort of get out of the house, to have their own jobs, to vote, right? Big changes, even though, it's going to take a long time for women to sort of regain the level of kind of power and privilege that men have. But still, these are big steps forward. And I think, the video here, the author of the video said that, not much changed, and I don't know. I think those are reasonably big changes, right? Although, of course, women still had a long way to go, but those are important changes, I think. Any other ways in which women's roles or gender roles changed? I kind of think that covers it, but is there anything missing? No? Okay. How did things stay the same? How did gender roles remain the same?
And still have men still have higher pay.
Sure, yeah. Women may have been working in the same jobs as men, but they sure weren't paid the same as men, right? And in fact, they were paid half, which does not seem fair in any way, right? But still, men's contribution was seen as more important than women's, right? Women were still discriminated against. What else stayed the same? What else stayed the same? What did they mean when they said that, the idea is that, men's job was to bear arms and women's job was to bear armies? What did they mean by that? Yeah, and maybe more generally, what's woman's role? Yeah, in the home as mothers. Yeah. So men are men are supposed, quote unquote, men are supposed to be the ones that go out and earn a living and, you know, fight wars and produce and bring home the money for the family, right? That's what men are supposed to do. Whereas women are supposed to be in the home, you know, giving birth to children, raising children. That's women's jobs, right? And this is men's jobs. And even though the lines kind of got blurred a little bit during the war out of necessity, you know, at the end of the war, people didn't just throw gender roles out altogether and say, oh, okay, we're all equal. Anyone can do anything now. It wasn't like that, right? There was still a very strong idea about what women's job was in society and what men's jobs in society was, right? So that those ideas stayed the same. And to some degree, they are still present with us. If you look even in a modern society like Canada right now, you'll see that lots of families have situations where both parents work, right? So if you have a heterosexual couple, both the man and woman have jobs and they go to work. But if someone's working part-time, it's almost always the woman who's working part-time. If someone's caring for the kids, it's almost always the woman who's doing it. And the housework, even if both the man and woman are working the same amount, women tend to do more of the housework than men do. So even so, today, even though, of course, women can have their own jobs and men can have their own jobs and everything's more equal in that regard, women still find themselves doing more of the domestic work, the cooking, the cleaning, the shopping, the raising of children. That still falls to women much more often than it falls to men. So even though we've come kind of a long way from 1918, those ideas are still kind of floating around in the back of everyone's minds, interestingly. Any other ways in which gender roles stay the same? What do you think? Did we miss anything? Mark, did we miss anything? I do have to agree with him though. The Russian Women's Battalion of Death, great band name. Yeah. Although he kind of called it, he kind of reserved it, so I don't think we can use it. Okay, last one. Positive and negative outcomes of these changes. So, were there any positive things to come out of these gender roles staying the same that you can think of? Any negative ones?
Yeah, like today we're talking about many of like gender equality in nowadays, like in the modern days, and then like at that moment it's like the gender role didn't change that after the war, but it is not a good thing to see or happen or not good to see because basically like the bias on us is like maybe like women love pink in color, men love like blue or something like just like people got tell what should they do and like if you're a girl you can't join the army and stuff. But like it will affect our choose or our choice to what we actually want to do for nowadays. So it's a negative side for like not being changed.
Yeah, so some of those gender roles do limit the lives of women, right? And the lives of men too to some degree, but primarily they limit the lives of women. They limit their choices, their opportunities, their ability to kind of do what they want, right? And even today, when we're talking a lot about gender equality, we still have those kind of barriers to overcome, right? Because they are still kind of in our subconscious, right? They're still kind of mixed in with our culture, right? And again, you still see that when, you know, even though you have both men and women working in homes, you see that women are doing much more housework than men are, right? Because again, somewhere in the back of our minds, that's still women's jobs, right? That's still their job to do. Is that kind of what you were thinking of? Yeah. Positive or negative changes, or positive or negative things about gender roles changing?
Women's wearing and hairstyle change, and so the activities probably more interesting. And like the woman has the right to go to an important stroke, like some important role. So
Yeah.
maybe some women are powerful and have the ability to do. So that makes our society better.
Yeah. So allowing a little more flexibility in gender roles and allowing women to enter the workforce and sort of choose different lives is certainly much more interesting, right? There's nothing wrong with, you know, sort of being in the home and doing the cooking and the cleaning and the raising of children. There's nothing wrong with that as long as that's your choice to do it, right? But but people deserve the right to choose other things as well, right? And so this actually gives women the right to or it's the very beginning of women having the right to choose, right? If they want to have a part-time job, if they want to have a full-time job, maybe, you know, God forbid, they actually don't want children and they want to, you know, kind of live their own lives kind of thing. That's possible as well, right? And so it's more interesting, but it's also beneficial to society, right? The presenter pointed out that maybe one of the issues with Germany not winning the war is that they didn't actually use all of their workforce, right? And other countries recognize that if you're going to win the war, everybody's got to pitch in, right? Men, women, doesn't matter. Everybody's got to be, it's all hands on deck, as they say, right? Everybody's got to be pulling in the same direction. Anything else? Positive or negative outcomes? Yeah.
Women should have increase they can work outside to
Sure.
have some
Yeah. So they were, you know, the activities of women were beneficial in helping soldiers, right? And again, you know, you can have the best army in the world, right? Who are the smartest and toughest and best shots and whatever. You can have the best army around, but if you can't supply them with the things that they need, if you can't give them food and, you know, uniforms and boots and guns and bullets and all those things, if you can't supply them, they're not going to win, right? They're going to get massacred out there. So, you know, again, equally, what women were doing at home was at least as important as what men were doing in the field, right? Because you can't win a war with no supplies. And women were there to, you know, to work in those factories and to provide the men with what they needed. So that was huge, huge benefit, right? Anything else that we missed? Positive or negative? Sophie, can you think of anything?
As I remember, like in that days, like women are treated as an object, not as a human. So like after the war and like the gender roles change, and then like they are getting more and more rights to or freedom to like living or something. And then like back in that days, like women can't open a bank account without a man, but now we can because like sort of like it's like a push for the right of the freedom and then for the woman.
Yeah.
And so it really did a like important job in for the war, for the gender roles.
Yeah, it was definitely a step in the right direction for gender equality, right? Didn't really get, it didn't get all the way to fully equal, but it took a step forward, right? And again, women, as we'll see a little bit later, in the 1920s have far more freedom than women had just 10 years earlier, right? And again, it's certainly not equal. They certainly faced all kinds of discrimination and sexism and poor treatment, but a step forward was achieved, right? And I think that's worth mentioning, right? Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left. I'm gonna end it there. I do have something that's kind of related to what's happening here, but it's more in the modern world that I'd like to discuss tomorrow. So that's kind of what we'll do then. Before we break, does anyone have any questions or comments or concerns, complaints, criticisms? Trying to think of other C or K words. But anything? No, all good? Okay. That is it for today then. Pack it up. I will see you tomorrow, which will be Friday. Friday's the day before the weekend. So, yeah, I'll see you then. Bye, everybody.